Okay, today I'd like to talk a little bit about what is the central concept of Dramatica. I've said it many times before, but let's uh, let's see what AI says about the central concept of Dramatica. Here we go. AI, ChatGPT. What is the central concept of Dramatica? ChatGPT knows a lot about Dramatica. You'd be surprised. The central concept of Dramatica is that every complete story is an analogy to a single mind trying to solve a problem. This is called the story mind. In other words, a story's characters, plot, theme, and genre are not just random elements. Together, they represent different parts or functions of a mind at work, addressing a central inequity or conflict. The audience experiences both the external conflicts between characters, events, and the internal process like doubt, confidence, change, justification, as if they were being, as if they were witnessing both the workings of a single mind and the different players within it. Okay, from this insight, Dramatica builds out its entire theory of story structure and dynamics. Would you like a quick diagram or metaphor to illustrate how the story mind works? Well, normally I would say no, but since we haven't tried this before, I'll just say sure. Okay, and simple metaphor. The story mind is a crossroads. Never heard this one before. This is interesting. Imagine a single person standing at a crossroads facing a difficult life decision. Logic argues for one choice, emotion pleads for another, memory recalls past experiences, desire dreams of what could be. Skepticism warns of risks, confidence urges trust. That internal debate is what the story mind models, but instead of staying inside one head, a story externalizes these mental forces. Logic becomes a character, emotion becomes another character, the crossroads becomes the plot, and the debate becomes the theme. So the audience watches a mind wrestling with a problem, but disguised as a plot with characters and themes. Well, that's not too bad. I wouldn't say it exactly that way, and I think it's a little inaccurate. But let me just put in here in my search the story mind, okay, and see what comes up now, since that's what we're talking about. So images. Let's go to images just for fun. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Lots of people have written things now talking about story minds. Nobody used the term when we came up with it 30 years ago, but now it looks like mostly everybody else has come up with versions, and I can't even find. There's even this thing, Story Mind Incorporated, which does narratives. Okay, they came out about 10 years ago. We've been already using the Story Mind as my company name for a bunch of time, and they just went ahead and stole it. Story in a State of Mind, Story of the Mind. Okay, well, this is getting us nowhere. What I'm going to do is go to my blog here, which is, or I'll go to storymind.com right now. Just plain old storymind.com. Let's see what we got. All right, we got nothing. It's just sitting there. Oh, and I didn't want to be in images. I want to be in all. Okay. Story Mind. There we go. Now, welcome to Story Mind. I used to have on the sides of this all kinds of links and everything because I was selling software and trying to make money and get the theory out there and make a name for myself. But I'm 72 now. I'm retired and I don't care about all that stuff anymore. What I care about is making sure that anything that I came up with that could be useful to people would be there after I'm gone so that it can continue to help maybe with individuals. And if individuals learn about how all this works, how narrative works in psychology and within their own minds, then maybe they'll also understand how it works in society and how we interrelate in narratives within narratives within narratives at all kinds of different scales. Now, if that can happen, maybe, just maybe, we'll end up having a little more understanding in the world. People will be able to more easily admit there is another point of view that may not be based on our experiences, but makes more sense than our point of view when based on the other person's experiences in life. That way, perhaps we can come together a little bit, ease the suffering in the world, be a little more accurate about the truth by running into parallax between many points of view, multiple points of view, until we really understand, should I really be doing this with coffee over a laptop? Really understand what's going on in the human mind, in human society, in human history, and in the future history. just like the Foundation trilogy. Yep, and that's what Dramatica is. And the central concept of Dramatica is the story mind. Now, I want to look at something over here. I'm going to go, let's see, what have I got here? Hundreds of articles. Well, that's pretty good. Story streaming structure. Okay. Um, very good. All kinds of good stuff about the story mind. And videos on story structure. Oh, I'm already there. Okay, well, here, I want to show you something over on the YouTube, yeah. I have a bunch of channels on YouTube. One of them is my main channel. I kind of throw everything into there so people don't really get a single thing. I throw in my music, my AI art, home movies, for God's sake, and also much stuff about Dramatica. But if I search now for Story Mind, you'll find this is my most popular channel. This one has, okay, where are we? I'll stop it. Okay, look, there we go. I have trouble with computers. You may gather that by now. Okay, this is the Story Mind channel on YouTube, where you may be watching this. If you're not, you should go there, because it's got, look, narrative function of plot, and all about narrative, quads, Dramatica quads, you know, and all this stuff. Plus, here's what I wanted to show you. This first thing, we're going to look at a little bit of this video from 1999. It's the very first complete video description of the Dramatica theory. It was recorded simultaneously with a webcast, which is one of the first webcasts. Oh!
The central concept.
Hold on, I'm going to go back here. There we go. I forgot I had my headphones in. I was doing some music. Okay. So anyway, this is the first recording. It's 114 episodes, 12 hours. The original one was 20 hours, but it had a lot of video clips that I couldn't show online because copyrighted material. So I left those out, but this is my long course.
Let's look a little bit at the central concept in Dramatica that sits at the center of...
Oh, God bless it. You see how this happens? You see why I can't do anything nice? Okay, we're going to go back right there, and I'm going to... What I did was I hit the... Yeah, I was trying to raise the sound, and I hit the thing that cancels the sound. Okay, there we go.
Let's look a little bit at the central concept in Dramatica that sits at the center of it all. That's why it's a central concept, because it sits at the center.
Little Groucho Marx there.
That concept is called the story mind. It's what makes Dramatica unique. Dramatica says that every complete story is an analogy to a single human mind trying to deal with that inequity. That's quite a mouthful. What it really means, though, is that every complete story is a model of the mind's problem-solving process. In fact, it says that all the elements of the story are actually elements of a single human mind. Not the author's mind, not the audience mind, but a mind created symbolically in the process of communicating across a medium.
Okay, so that's great. That's me 30 years ago, like 35 years ago, 1999, let's see, 26 years ago. And boy, am I old and disgusting now. But I was actually young and disgusting then. Big change. But what I wanted to get to with this is that story mind, the whole structure, the whole concept of Dramatica, is that every story structure is a model of the mind's problem-solving process. Yeah. Okay, why? Why would that be? Well, it turns out, and there's many reasons, and I can go on forever, and I will in other videos, but in this one, I just want to do it very briefly. I think I'm about to be asked a question. No, no question. Teresa came in, looked around, and then couldn't find what she wanted. Clearly it wasn't me. And now she's back out doing yard work and also making a wonderful box for me as a woodworker. She makes fine furniture, fine. Anyway, it's all really great. I'll tell you about that later in another video that doesn't have anything to do with story structure. But the whole point of these videos is that I don't want to just limit myself to trying to be professional and give you, here it is, here it is, here it is, out, anymore. I am too old and tired for that. Get the hell off my lawn. Get the hell off my channel, if you don't want this kind of a conversation. But I do realize you came here for information. So we are going to have that information now. Got it? Okay. I'm really not that crazy. Probably just amped up. Okay. All right. The story mind. What is the story mind? Well, here's how the story mind came to be. We were working on story structure. We wanted to find some rules. We wanted to find some truths that we could go out and say, "Hey, this is how stories work. This is what what it is." Because we wanted to write better stories ourselves, and we'd written some dogs, Chris and I, over the years. And we decided no more doggies. We want to understand how this whole thing works. So, um, Chris asked a very important question. We'd get together every morning for an hour before he went off to Screenplay Systems, which later became Wright Brothers, which made Dramatica. He's a partner there. And I was working on editing a feature film at the time. And before we went off to our duties, he would come by my place and we'd have some coffee and we'd talk about story structure every single morning. Well, we started that conversation 10 years previous, got to a certain point and said, "Hey, we're at a wall." Chris said, brilliantly, "We need to wait until we've seen some more of life." So he said, "Let's just put it on hold for now and we'll come back later." And about 10 years later, maybe even a little more, I got a call and he said, "You know that theory of story we were working with 10 years ago?" I said, "Well, I sure do, Chris." And he said, "Well, I'm thinking well, he didn't actually talk like that, but my impression, "I'm thinking we really need to get together and start work again because I think we've seen enough of life to make sense of it all." And I said, "By golly, you're right." So we got together at a little booth in a place called the Coral Cafe about well, I won't want to tell you how close to my home. Maybe I'll get stalked. Well, God, if I tell you the Coral Cafe, okay, it's about 2 or 3 blocks from my home, okay? And we had a booth, which is one of the ones up front nearest the door where you enter. And we sat down and we started working on Dramatica. And so you know, every morning we get together 5 days a week and work on this theory. And Chris asked this great question. He said, if there's a character like Scrooge who doesn't, what? Something dropping down here. Oh, okay. Never mind. If there's a character like Scrooge who's actually the cause of all the problems in the story, problems for himself and problems for others, it's because of his attitude. How come he doesn't see it? Clearly, he doesn't see it. He sees another view of the world in which he's not the villain, another view of the world in which life is hard and people can't be trusted and everybody's going to sell you out and nobody's kind and all that. How did that happen? And how does it prevent him from seeing the truth? Even if, in fact, he was confronted with it, he would deny it. "No, that's not true. This is a horrible world." You can't just stop somebody's point of view until you carry them through the process of thinking about it, of being forced to see that that's not working right now to solve the problems, and that there are other points of view that seem to be working, but he's never considered them or tried them before. So it's really, is it the tried and true method, or is it the new kid on the block who's got a great solution, but it's never been used? And what makes it hard is there's a moment of critical choice at which you have to then decide a leap of faith without enough evidence to go one way or the other. Do you go with the old one that's failing or the new one that promises to succeed but hasn't really been tried when everything's on the table, everything's riding on it? That's what stories are about. But why a story mind? Well, when Chris asked that question about Scrooge, why he didn't see it, our answer after a few days of thinking about it was there was some sort of blind spot, some sort of area that they couldn't look into. What is a blind spot? It's sort of like a black hole of the mind. What is it? Where does it come from? How does it form? And how do you get rid of something like that? Okay, so we started saying, well, let's look at the psychology of the main character. Let's try to understand what he's going through. And we began to put Post-it notes up all over at Wright Brothers Screenplay Systems at the time, in the conference room, and where we would meet. I had an office there, and so we'd put these up, and sometimes we'd say, well, in looking at movies, we can see the main characters talking about what they know and what they don't know. So knowledge became one of them. They're talking about what's moral and what's immoral. They're talking about what they have faith in and what they don't believe. And so all of these different, okay, so we put up like scores of these things on the walls, and we found out that looking at all those scores of things, there was some consistency. Some of them seemed like they would group together, like faith and disbelief. Okay, they should be grouped into some sort of family. So we started grouping these things, and as we began to group them out of all these scores of them, we discovered that they fell into these quad patterns. It turns out that whenever you wanted to group them, there were 4 items that went together, and if there were more items, it's because they were different words we'd seen that really meant the same thing and ought to be combined into one. Whole point is, that we ended up with a pretty good map of the psychology of main characters, not just Scrooge, but all kinds of folks from Luke Skywalker to Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Some of them archetypal, some of them Hamlet, for God's sake. Okay, so, well, maybe not for God's sake, but for sake of argument. All right, so we had all that information up there, and we looked at it, and we looked at it, and we looked at it, and we kind of understood a little bit about what was going on, but there was something that just didn't fit. We found that, in fact, some of these things, if you took 4 of them in a family, there was an overall family heading. Like you could say, okay, one of the things we're looking at is we're looking at the way the characters see the universe. And in the universe, they might look at the past, the present, the future, or the progress that's being made in the universe. 4 items under a larger family, which we called a parent. If that isn't a parent, I don't know what is. Anyway, it was a parent, okay? And these were the children. And eventually we found that we actually could go down like 4 levels of these things. Parents and children, and each of the children, you can see that, each of the children then went down and broke into 4, and then each of those children broke. It seemed that was built into these things. We didn't impose it. It was just what we discovered in looking at all these main characters, that's the pattern it had. Once we started looking for the psychology of the main character, that was the beginning of the breakthrough. But there was something else. We went through and saw that there's a bunch of terms here that don't really seem to apply to the main character, but they are psychology and they are in the story. Terms that just aren't talked about by the main character, aren't of interest to the main character, but they're still in the story. So what are we dealing with here? Another character that has these traits, or are they distributed among the characters who aren't the main character? Then one day I had the eureka moment when I looked at the wall and I said, "Oh my God." I stood there. I actually stood there. Oh my God, or some equivalent. So close enough. Anyway, I looked at it and it hit me right at that moment, like a light switch. I kid you not. I said, wait a minute. Maybe those psychological terms are not about the main character. They're about the story itself. Maybe story structure is not just about the psychology of the main character. Maybe it's about the psychology of the story. Well, how can it be about the psychology of the story? It's a thing, not a person. And then I thought to myself, maybe the story is representative of the human mind. And the main character is like that sense of self within ourselves. And all the other characters are facets of that mind, like when we look at the intellectual character, the character of reason, a reason archetype, who's always trying to solve things by using their logic. And then we look at a character who's the opposite of that, the emotion, who's always trying to solve problems by looking at it passionately, what feels right, okay? And they get into clashes. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't agree. I didn't know all that then. All I knew at that moment was, okay, there's a psychology to the story itself as if it were a super mind. And the main character is in that story, and they have their own psychology. Whoa, that differential. I mean, that's weird. So I went running down the hall, literally, well, or at least, fast walking, as fast as I could, all the way down the hall to where Chris's office was, and I burst through the open door, you can imagine that, and said, "Chris, I think it's not just the psychology of the main character, but the things we're seeing are the psychology of the mind of the story itself." And he said, "Wait a minute." And then he got up like he often did when I hit him with a new theory concept, and he laid right down on the carpet in front of his desk. He needed to do this because for theory concepts, he had to block out the rest of the world. So he laid down, closed his eyes, clasped his hands over his chest, and when he did that, he waited for about 2 or 3 minutes. I always knew to let him go until he got his head around it. And so at that moment, after 2 or 3 minutes, he opened his eyes and said, "I think you're right." And that's when we began the whole concept of the story mind, and we decided to map it out. And as we mapped it out, we found out that later on, we figured out why would there be a story mind, a mind hidden in the story structure. And here's how it kind of works. When people come together into groups for mutual benefit towards a common goal or against a common enemy or anything like that, when they come together, they begin to self-organize. And how do they self-organize? Well, the very same traits that we all have within us, reason and emotion, skepticism and faith and all of these things that we have within ourselves, there will be characters who will emerge when we get together in a group where one becomes the voice of reason, one becomes the resident skeptic, one becomes the one who uses logic, one becomes the passionate voice of the group, the voice of humanity, as it were. Okay, that's what happens in groups. They self organize inevitably. For there to be a narrative, that's what happens. When that happens, it becomes a narrative. So it works both ways. And the reason for that is that when we solve problems on our own, we're each a general practitioner for our own lives. We use our logic, we use our passion, we use our faith, we use our disbelief, we use all kinds of different traits. There's actually 8 archetypal traits and 64 individual ones, if you break those down into their small components, that we're using all the time on every problem we have. And every individual problem we have is its own narrative. So we may be juggling, I don't know, hundreds of narratives in our lives sometimes. Big ones like the narrative with our relationship, or the narrative at work with our boss, or the narrative about how our kids are doing in school. But there's lots of little ones like, I don't know, should I have the toast or should I have the scrambled eggs? I struggle with that every single morning. I imagine you do too. Well, perhaps that's presumptuous on my part. Anyway, what I'm getting at is that we all contain these elements. Every single one of us. It's what makes us all human beings. We all have all those elements. It's just the experiences we have that tell us which ones to bring into play at which point in a narrative, which is a problem-solving process, to try and figure out what's going on, number one, and number two, what are we going to do about it? What's our plan, our battle plan? How are we going to alter things in order to accommodate what our needs are based on our human experiences that load up the variables of all of these aspects of ourselves that we all carry, each and every one. You hear me? Okay, so what's going on then is that each of us is a general practitioner in our own life, a jack of all trades, sometimes masters of few, none, some. But when we come together in groups, some of us have a tendency to be more adept or more interested in doing the job of looking at things reasonably, and others want to look at it more passionately. And so those who are drawn by their individual natures and their experiences that lead them to favor particular kinds of problem solving, they will emerge as the voice of reason, or the resident skeptic, or the faithful supporter, or the doubting Thomas. All of these characters will emerge automatically as people gravitate towards taking that point of view within the larger group mind. And what you have, because authors over hundreds of generations, in communicating, authors stumbled about until they found that they could make a point in a story by showing how real life worked and then stacking the deck to make it look like they should have done this instead of that, zigged instead of zagged, and then they can impact what people do in real life. Power. All authors want power. Well, anyway, so recognizing that, they began to see that there were these common things that they had to do. There always had to be a main character. There always had to be a character who had the opposite philosophic view to the main character. We call them at various times the obstacle character, the impact character, the influence character, and he's been given other names by other people as well. But that character represents the opposite philosophic view, which is the whole message of the story is about that. Even if it's something as simple as an action picture, there's always some kind of decision has to be in there where somebody has to decide, I'm going to go with this guy or that guy. I'm going to use this technique or that technique. I won't act like my enemy no matter how much that risks what I stand for, or I will. What's the right way to go? That's the message of the story. So these are the problems we're trying to solve in our lives. And when you put all that together, the leader of the group, the avatar, the Steve Jobs, the President of the United States, whoever it is that we look at and say that person represents this particular narrative of this particular size, that person is the main character. They're the ones that we look at the story revolving around. And so with all of that, that's how this evolves. When authors, writers, storytellers over hundreds of generations wanted to represent real life, they had to talk about what the group relationships were. And quite without intending it, they did find the conventions of storytelling that included the reason character and the emotion character and all the others, because that's in there always when a group finally congeals into a narrative. Okay, there's lots of things before a group congeals into a narrative. It's like before a solar system is a solar system, you got all this interstellar gas. But once it forms a solar system, things are going to orbit. And that's what is going on here societally. Anyway, so with that in mind, then we find that the main character, like each of us, is a general practitioner working on his particular problem. And the story has a problem at large in which the main character is a part, but the only one that we stand in their shoes and understand what they're going through internally as they're trying to solve the problem and also fulfill their role in the larger picture. The same way in a group, we would join a club, an organization. We would be part of, we are the state of California. We are the Johnsons. That's our family. And when you have a group of any kind, then that group takes on an identity. That group tries to accomplish things as a group. That group, God, I need some coffee here. That group will have its own agenda, and we will be assigned duties within the group. And there are certain things we'd like to affect within the group to adjust its trajectory socially, activity-wise. So we have a relationship with that group of which we are a part, and we may be parts of many groups like the family and the office and the sports fan and the, we did service in a war or something, and we have that. So we all have these different kinds of groups that we belong to, fans of a television show. So anyway, we have the larger concern, and within us we have that smaller concern. And stories are about how does the individual deal with their role in the larger group while they're also trying to solve the problem that they have as a general practitioner within themselves. It's that differential nobody ever saw before because they thought stories were just linear. This happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. And you go from the beginning to the middle to the end, which is what Aristotle said in Poetics. For everything there's a beginning and there's an end, and the rest of it's the middle. That's pretty much what he said in the works that we have in Poetics. Anyway, but the whole idea is that it's actually two fractal levels. There's the level of the individual who is the general practitioner and the greater fractal representation of exactly the same kind of structure and dynamics of the mind at large. That's what the story mind is. Now, how the hell is that going to be of interest to any writers? It's not. You have to be freaking insane as I am, or just strangely attracted to this kind of understanding of the underpinnings of psychology, the underpinnings of society, the underpinnings of our entire species. And sometimes I wonder if other species as well have exactly the same kind of thing, if they've got similar mammalian brains with a left side and a right side, and all of this neural networks and ganglia and boutons and all that shit, neurology. Anyway, but the point is that nobody who's doing stories is interested in this. So fortunately, as I mentioned at the beginning of this one, I think we have just come together to do a joint effort in a brand new company with another company I can't quite mention yet until we make the public announcement. But their whole focus has been for the last 10 or 15 years on doing story structure by using Dramatica, but having it in the background so that Dramatica concepts could be employed without having to address them directly, and you don't have to know any of the stuff about the story mind. Okay, you don't have to deal with that. You can just tell your story, okay? And it's a really good system that they've now added AI to. And now we're going to take Dramatica and we're going to blend that with it so that the full power, the fullness, the wholesome richness that is Dramatica can be included with that interface over it, the frosting on the cake, that interface, so that the cake is good and solid and accurate as it ever was, as it should always be. And on top of it, we have now put this frosting to make it totally acceptable and a handy confection that any writer would want to take a bite of. Okay, so we're doing that. You're going to hear more about that soon, but just keep in your mind the story mind, which is where I start, because as you see with these particular videos, I begin with a topic and then I just let myself roll. Well, what you're getting is kind of a core dump of 33 years, a third of a century of thinking about this stuff. And though it may be a little disjointed, a little, okay, it's still got all kinds of information if you're the kind of person that wants all the details and wants to dive in there and get it all, for God's sake. Well, you just got all of this about that part of the story mind, which will come up again. The story mind will come up many, many, many times in many different directions, and each one hopefully will layer over the others so that it creates a richer and richer understanding, even though there's quite a bit of duplication along the way. Hopefully, it's interesting enough to intrigue you. And if not, well, go away. Well, that's it. All for today. I probably have to heat up my coffee, and I'm on to some other project, maybe making music or AI art or AI, AI, AIO. I don't know. Anyway, see you next time.